All right, welcome. It is 1 o'clock, and so we're going to get this going. I cannot wait to introduce these two guests today. We're really excited to be talking about the food and beverage industry in particular and the impacts that climate reporting pressure is having on them. So what we're going to do is introduce our wonderful guests that you can already see here today. So we're going to start with Jim, and we're just going to go through. Love to get an understanding of who you are and walk through how and why you got into sustainability and kind of your journey to get to this stage.
Okay.
And then we'll proceed with the conversation from there. So, Jim, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Jim Stewart. I'm Director of Environmental Health and Safety at Bobo's Oak Bars in Loveland, Colorado. Um, I came to this. I've been in this position for 2.5 years. I was with another gluten-free bakery before that, and was involved with sustainability efforts there. I come to this from a more traditional EHS perspective, not in accountancy, not in operations strictly per se. Our product, we're a pretty progressive company. Our customer base is very interested in our behaviors in this respect. So, hence my involvement with the whole ESG program. In fact, I wear that hat as the corporate representative and project lead for it.
Did I hear rumors that you might have gotten recently a new title or promoted?
Well, I'm a director, but what they decided, since ESG has an E in it and EHS has an E in it, they've kind of given that to me. They haven't formally changed the title, but they're talking about doing that at some point.
Well, we'll give you some congratulations in advance for the extra work. All right, Steve, over to you. Love to hear a little bit more about your background and what brought you to sustainability.
Sure, Sandra, that'll be fine. Yeah, so my name's Steve Owen. I'm currently the business development executive at Delmar Foods, which is a food group based out of Canada. I've been in the food industry for over 40 years, primarily on the ingredient manufacturing side, and really been involved in a lot of things. My previous role before I tried to retire a little bit was to move into, I was a CEO of a food ingredient distributor. And that is really where I started to get interested in the environmental side. So we aligned with a monitoring system called EcoVadis. And that was really our starting point in getting aware of kind of the touch points of how, really before we started talking about scope 1 and scope 2 and 3 and so on. So it was really starting to learn that. And now in my role, I've been able to run a lot of different projects on environmental stuff within Tilsonburg and Delmar. And I also do some consulting with some upcycling companies because I just believe in where this is going in the industry and where we should be going as a group of food scientists and technologists.
Very cool. And we've got north and south of the border here. So we've got the Canadian Steve Owen representing kind of the Canadian industry. And then we've got Jim representing more of the US, although I know Steve does a little bit of business in the US as well. So just want to be fully transparent. So both Jim and Steve are clients of Carbonhound, but we're excited to maybe not talk so much about Carbonhound today and more about your particular journey. So if we just go to the next slide. So the topic today is we're going to be chatting about really navigating climate pressure and leveraging it to grow your food and beverage business. And I think we'll probably expand this more into sustainability because I feel like that's kind of a broader category where there's a lot more interest in marketability, especially in the food and bev space, and maybe try to understand a little bit more about what sustainability actually means, because in my mind, at least, it's grown to the point where it is difficult to understand what sustainable even means from a labeling perspective. So I guess I'd love to start just maybe talking a little bit about kind of what the key value drivers were for your businesses to start thinking about climate and start thinking about ESG. And maybe we'll start with you, Steve, and then go over to Jim afterwards.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of aspects to it. I mean, one, there is more and more pressure within our industry, within the general audit protocols. Now people are asking about your environmental initiatives, so we need to better respond to that. And I know you don't want to talk too much about Carbonhound, but I'm a great believer in measuring, and if you don't measure, you can't improve. So I think it's important, and people are starting to look at it from a carbon footprint point of view and a general sustainability point of view. But I do agree with you, Sanders. It's really hard to say, am I more sustainable or less sustainable than a competitor? Or is my carbon footprint better or worse than a competitor? And I think that's what we've got to do as an industry, to try and establish some very clear guidelines that our consumers are going to understand. So, sustainability is being packaging driven primarily, I would say, and not so much about the whole supply chain. But the more we look into it as a business, we are looking at reducing everything we can on carbon footprint and on our packaging usage, and making us more efficient as a business going forward.
Yeah, and what we're going to get more into, I'm really want to dive deeper into this whole idea of sustainability and what you guys are thinking about in terms of how you've tackled that problem a little bit later for sure. Thanks for that, Steve. Jim, over to you.
Well, as I said, I was enticed over 2.5 years ago to Bobo's, and we got a very, very rude shock as far as climate change. We manufacture oat bars, and we're in that natural food space. And I joined in October, and the new director of supply chain, he started 3 weeks after me. And then 6 weeks later, we were dependent upon Canadian oats. And the harvest came in at only 53% of what was expected. So we watched the primary ingredient for our entire product line jump the raw material cost from 64 cents a pound to $1.06 because of drought. So that was a pretty rude shock to the company. We had to scramble. And so they said, oh, okay, your secondary source is a country in Eastern Europe called Ukraine.
Oh, no.
This was January of 2021. So we all know what happened 30 days later there. So scrambling, because most all of our product is agriculturally based, plant-based. So and because of our fairly stringent requirements for our product to meet customer expectations, we have a lot of single source. From a risk perspective, you put all your eggs in one basket. So we were compelled that this was the wake up, and over the last 2 years, the requirement, my work, I've been tasked with leading the effort towards sustainability. Our customer base, as I said, our customer base pretty much expects it now. We operate within a very, very knowledgeable and astute customer base. So these things are important to them. So even though we're privately held, we're not in the publicly traded environment. Here south in the United States, there's no regulatory requirement, but most of our customers are publicly traded. So they need this information. They want it. They have SEC reporting requirements. So it's not in many ways, it wasn't a want to do, like to do. It's a got to do in the business landscape here in the United States. And that's every day that's becoming more and more evident.
Yeah, I like to call that you're being voluntold. Mm-hmm. So Steve, sorry, what was that, Steve?
I was just going to say, literally the past couple of weeks, I am responding to at least one questionnaire on sustainability and climate and ESG per week.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it started already.
That's really interesting. And is it primarily like the multinational retailers that you find, or?
No, not, excuse me. No, not necessarily. It's, for the most part, American companies or American-based companies.
Interesting. Steve, I mean, I'd love to get your thoughts on that. What have you seen from your vantage point?
Yeah, we haven't seen too much activity. I mean, we hear a lot of talk about it, but not to the level that Jim's seeing yet. I think it's part of the general questionnaires on it, the quality side. I can see Jim talking, but I don't know if he is talking. So, no, okay. Yeah, I don't think we're seeing it quite there yet, but we really are anticipating it coming. And I think it will come more from companies driving this or consumers driving this rather than the legislation, because we environmental legislation come and go, but I think it's what's important to people, what's important to consumers, and if they're asking for it, that's what's going to drive behavior. And if companies, brands can monetize it, then they will, and that's what's going to drive their interest in it and their determination to reduce their carbon footprint or increase their sustainability claims. So.
That's really interesting. So when you're thinking, I think I saw some stat from McKinsey that said that about 8.2%. So there's about 3x more growth for companies that were making specific claims around sustainability versus claims that were more generic, which I thought was quite fascinating. Actually, sorry, it was 4 times more. And so I was just curious, like, when you think about the sustainability claims that your companies are looking to make, like, how do you evaluate those and make decisions as to which ones might make sense and which ones don't?
For us, we're generally a co-packer, so we want to be in a position where we can say to our customers, hey, if you need to put this on the label, then we'd be able to help them get there. We don't have our own brand, so we don't actually make any of those claims. But I think just generally within the industry, that's what people are going to have to do. But we've got to do it in a way that consumers really understand what it means. Otherwise, they'll get confused and they'll get lost within it. I mean, you already see, hey, I'm carbon neutral claims from a lot of companies, whether it's with their ESG. Nobody's really clear whether it's a carbon neutral level 1, 2, 3, whatever. They're not really being that specific about what they're claiming. So I think making sure that the consumers understand it will be pretty critical, especially in the food space. For me, I liken it to, hey, if you're going to claim something that's low fat, you have to be able to compare yourself to a comparable product at normal fat level. So I think if you're going to claim that you're more sustainable or lower carbon footprint, you've got to be able to prove that in a numerical way. So that's why I always go back, as I said before, measurement is key to everything. So.
How about yourself, Jim? Like, you're obviously more on the brand side. Like, what are you seeing? Other pressures from your marketing team, maybe, or I'm just curious as to what your experience has been.
Well, first off, we wanted to benchmark to what Steve said, and we went through a benchmarking exercise under the entire ESG format. About 50% of it was greenhouse gas and carbon footprint. And so we went through this exercise in October, and we were told that we were benchmarking against 42, I believe it was 42,643 or thereabouts food companies. And the benchmarking we underwent was under the new ISSB S1 and S2 standards. Well, they reported that the baseline for all those companies was 42% compliance with the new standards. The food industry leader was identified as 72% compliance, and we ended up with a 57%. Now, the numbers are misleading because literally we benchmarked under the new standards that had only been out for 3.5 months. So the vast majority of those people, it was self-reporting. It was under previous standards. So we were kind of, as I like to say, we were probably comparing oranges and bowling balls. Very few people. So in the United States right now, and the discussion, and out of that, before I move off that, out of that evaluation, it was very interesting. We're not, in our marketing materials and on our website now, we're not really talking that much about, we mentioned sustainability, but we don't make grandiose claims, and we do not plaster everything we're doing now. We were told we actually did better on the evaluation by not making outlandish claims or greenwashing. So that was very instructive. If you're going to say something, you better be able to back it up. Steve's point with data and numbers. In the United States right now, I see a trend, especially in this past 6 to 8 weeks, that the sustainability components of ESG are getting lost in this ESG argument. In fact, the United States Senate just killed a bill today requiring public service pensions to do ESG investment. And so I don't, and it reared its ugly head on one of the fourth Republican candidates' debates, which I was really surprised, the first 15 minutes. And it's viewed as woke capitalism south of the border here. So I don't think our customer base, I know they want, I think they understand the term sustainability, comparable to good environmental practice. However, beyond that, I think it's getting lost in this very polarized political environment. And so it's an interesting time, especially with the uncertainty, how the SEC is going to proceed. But if you make claims, the Federal Trade Commission is out there fining companies in the United States for making outrageous and false claims.
I think it's
can I just chip into what Jim said there? I think it's really interesting. If you think that your average consumer, who's shopping in a large retail store in Canada, isn't really reading the ESG report of that company. So they don't see it and feel it or understand necessarily what the bigger companies are going to do. But obviously those companies are out there making their claims. I don't see too many claims on the pack, which is yet to come, because I think people are a little bit concerned about how can they justify their claim. So you see different companies at the higher level telling you what their EcoVadis level is, or they can tell you what their benchmark environmental standard is, even that they're carbon neutral. But I don't think it's got to a point where consumers really understand it.
Yeah, I think the communication of it's really important, which is why I found that McKinsey document that finding really interesting about specific claims being a lot more effective than generic claims. And it's funny because I wonder, is carbon neutral really going to be the future of sustainability reporting and claiming, right? Because I think that's been the default has been, let's just make ourselves net zero or carbon neutral, throw that on the label somewhere. I mean, I've seen it a bunch with some brands in Canada, for instance, and in the US. But when you look at the California legislation, I think they're pushing back on that a little bit in terms of forcing really clear transparency around those claims, which I actually think is the right approach. I think we should be forcing a level of transparency around claims like that. But then you're also seeing the European approach where they're just saying you can't make those claims at all. And I think that maybe bringing the European context into this is also quite interesting, because I do feel like they're having a big impact even on the US market, given the exports there, and the fact that a lot of these major companies are multinational and they want to be playing by similar rules across these different jurisdictions. Just like you saw the Apple go to USB-C, right, on their iPhones because Europe forced them to. Now when you buy an iPhone in America, it's got a USB-C cable in it. So, it's going to be interesting to see how the California regulations, which require any business over $1 billion in revenue who's doing business in California to disclose scope 1, 2, and 3. And just for those in the audience who don't know much about different scopes, so scope 1 is your direct emissions. So that's basically what's within the four walls of your company. So something that you have control over. Scope 2 is what you're plugging into the wall. So that's imported energy. So that's the energy coming from the grid that you're using at your business. And then scope 3 is everything else. So it's kind of upstream and downstream emissions. So it could be transport of raw materials to site, any purchased goods or services, even things like employee commuting. And so the reason why we talk about scope 3 so much is that this is where those requests are coming to Jim and is because they're looking into their scope 3 emissions and looking at Bobo's and saying, okay, what's the impact of us doing business with you? So I'm just curious, Jim, I know you've done, and I'm not sure if you've done this as well, Steve, but when you're looking at your scope 3 emissions and kind of engaging with your suppliers and trying to really get an understanding of the broader impact of the businesses that you're working with, or in Jim's case, at Bobo's, what have you, I'm just curious if you had any interesting learnings as you've gone through that process.
Yeah, if I go first. Right now, my experience has been scope 2 is the easiest to get. Look at your utility bills. That's a fairly straightforward process. Scope 1 requires a bit of a deeper dive. And for me, I already had scope 1 and 2 in place, running it on a spreadsheet traditionally. And it's forced me to look at a larger carbon footprint than what I was doing before. Scope 3 seems to be the stone in everyone's shoe, if you will. You're having to talk to your supply chain. In many cases, you're being forced to perform due diligence in a supply chain that you've never had to do before. There is talk, just this past week, where for the SEC may not require scope 3 reporting because of the inherent difficulties with it. We're pretty fortunate. We've only got about 50 tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers. So fairly straightforward. Carbonhound assisting with us with that through the concierge service. But this is where, if you've got a company, a supply chain that you're dealing with hundreds, if not thousands of suppliers, not everybody's going to have this information. As I was told, and in fact, by your folks, and I'm finding this out, 25% of your supply chain probably has it, and they're more than happy to share it with you. 25% wants to do it. They're looking for an excuse to do it or the necessity. The other 50%, it's like that can be difficult.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jim. I think that's a huge huge problem going forward, is how do you get the people on board. But I also think the actual supply chain inside of the food industry is very difficult to get a number on. If we're bringing in ingredients from India and China because that's where they're grown, they then come across the ocean, they go into one distributor, they go to another distributor, and then they come to you. So you've got to take in all of this transportation impact as well. So, getting your carbon footprint number and then improving it can be a complete different supply chain model. So I
Well,
think
there's another level of complexity to that. In the food industry, it's not uncommon. We deal with a lot of brokers, and historically,
exactly, yeah,
brokers do not want you to know the source of the company. That's where they make their 5 to 10%. So you're depending upon them, and they're incentivized in many ways not to rock the boat or not to share that information. So it's difficult. We're fortunate we do have contact with the suppliers, that the brokers that we deal with for the most part allow us, but that's more the exception to the rule than the rule itself.
yeah. I've been running a distributor, Jim. I understood that kind of reluctance to share info, but we'd made a decision in the past that, hey, openness, transparency is part of what our business model. So
Now there's another question that I've not seen it pop up, but I have in some conversations when you're dealing with scope 3. Is there some double and triple reporting of the same numbers? And I'm surprised nobody's posed that question at a higher level in the media, and that, because it begs the question, how, if I'm reporting my suppliers who are reporting their suppliers and we're all reporting the same numbers in the aggregate, what's the legitimacy of the number that if I sell to Megawalt .com and they're making these claims based on my claims, based on my suppliers' claims, based on their suppliers' claims, is that making them look good? I've not seen anybody address that question.
Yeah, as they say, your scope 1 and 2 is somebody else's scope 3, right? So that, I think my understanding is that this is kind of on purpose, right? So that's why you're often required to report your scope 3 separately from your scope 1 and 2 for that exact reason, is to be able to ensure that we've got everything covered and there's not any double counting. But that being said, the main goal, I believe, is that scope 3 is where more than 85% of emissions come from, typically, in most businesses. So I think the idea was, how can we create more awareness around the impact that the dollars that are being spent in this business have on the overall impact, and how do we create, ecosystem change through reporting. So I think that was kind of the thinking behind that, is making sure that people had a more holistic view of the whole system that they're working within, rather than just thinking about what's within their four walls. But I agree. I think double counting in general, it can be quite dangerous. Like, I know that, for example, there's companies that might be selling offsets, right? And because they're avoiding emissions in their operations, and then at the same time, telling their clients that they're 50% better than their competitors, but little do those customers know that the environmental benefit has actually been sold off in the form of that offset, so they can't make any claims on their own reporting. So it can get a little bit tricky and confusing, and I think that's why I think it's really important that that there are standards in place, frankly, around how we manage this, and that we're all speaking the same language. And I think you look at regulations like the ISSB or standards like the ISSB, International Sustainable Standards Board, like in the consolidation that you're starting to see in this space, I think that's been really positive. And I think I'm hopeful that we'll get to a better place as it relates to really cracking down on bad actors who are trying to make too many claims and trying to really reward the folks that are putting in the work and actually making the change. So completely agree with that. I was actually, are there any other blockers that you guys see around driving sustainability initiatives forward? I know I heard there's a story maybe about a rapper visitor. Jim might want to share, and I'm sure Steve has
Sure.
some.
I can share the story. I'll just, we had a major customer come in last year. And so from a sustainability perspective, our recycling program, it's good. It's pretty solid, but there are still opportunities, as there always are. So we use an aluminum oxide film wrap for our individual packaging. This gives us the ability, because if you want to buy Bobo's bars, chances are it may sit in our warehouse for a couple of weeks after bake, and it may sit in a regional distribution center for a couple of months until it's called for by the regional stores of our customers. So they wheel me out every time these mega stores come in, box stores and that. And so I had one gentleman who was one of their sustainability people. The entire time I gave about a 10 to 15 minute presentation, and he was playing with an empty wrapper. And I knew what was coming. And so he said, and it was instructive because I had all of my executive leadership there. So he finally, I asked any questions. And he says, yeah. He said, what about this? And I said, well, I said, you probably already know what that is. You know what the materials construction, it's not recyclable. It does have even though it's very lightweight, it has a pretty significant carbon footprint for that product. And I said, so let me answer your question with a question. I said, we can transition to a recyclable, low carbon alternative, and we can give you 3 months. I said, or do you want the performance of that product that will give you up to 11 months? The next day, the email came, stick with the 11 months. It was insightful because I've found that if you do sustainability right and you give it some thought, you're not going to make money off it, but it's going to go offset loss. It's going to save you money elsewhere. So there is a profitability to it, but it has to be well thought, well designed, and there's got to be systems and processes in place to support it. At the end of the day, companies are in business to make money. It's as simple as that. And that cost benefit has always got to be weighed. I think there's, in many ways, you can make sustainability not only pay for itself, but add a little bit to the bottom line. And you're meeting the expectations of your customers. And then if you're in a regulated community, that those entities. But it's a tough call. We bake using natural gas. I made a comment just 6 weeks ago to the executive board. Hey, rip all these brand new ovens out, which are less than 2 years old, and install electric ovens. You can offset the electric. Well, you would have thought that I had called for the end of the world, because the process bakers love gas-fired ovens. So you have to look for, and there's no such thing as renewable natural gas. So it's carbon footprint. In fact, it's probably the largest carbon footprint I've got. So we purchased offsets. We went to Europe, to the regulated community, to purchase our offsets, wanting legitimacy because of to avoid any possibility of accusations of greenwashing. Ours support an agro forestry project in Tanzania for peasant farmer cooperatives that have been negatively impacted by global warming. So they've had to change the way they grow coffee. 90% of everything that we paid for carbon reduction units goes to that effort. So, there are ways to do it. They have to be intelligent. They have to be well thought out. They have to be supported by the science and data.
I'd love to get Steve's take on this because I know you're a food technologist at heart. So, how do you go about thinking about balancing the use of technology to help us create a more sustainable future in the food and beverage space?
Yeah, I think there's two aspects I was going to comment on. One, obviously, there is always the balance between, technology, what you're putting in there, because if you have a shorter shelf life, you get more waste. So that does impact what you're doing as a business, and it impacts, consumer pricing and everything else. So I think there's always going to be the technology that you've got to implement, whether it's your packaging technology. Yes, being aware of the sustainability of it is really important. I personally, I think the approach of buying offsets is not necessarily the right way to go. I think that's just funding another scheme. But if people are generating offsets through what they do, then that should be benefiting their business and making them more profitable. But I've never been a big fan of the offset. Back in the early 90s, I think in England, I was involved in packaging offsets where we were trying to, reduce recycling. The offsets didn't work. It just the awareness and consumer interest in reducing packaging worked. So that's my personal opinion. I'm not a big offset fan, but I don't think we as a company would solve our problem by going to offsets. But from a technology point of view, you have to balance your investment, as Jim was mentioning, the ovens. Hey, you've got gas-fired ovens. You're kind of stuck with that technology for a while. You've invested a lot of capital into that. Maybe next time you go around to replace an oven, because of the awareness around sustainability now, you might choose electric. But you're also going to look at the efficiency of an electric oven against a gas oven. Unfortunately, that's just going to be business. It's going to be, how fast does it warm up in the morning and how fast can I get going? Maybe you need better technology and you go to more of a microwave, so it's even faster. But it's going to be combining what you can do as a food technologist to make your product efficiently. But I think what's happening in the industry is the sustainability argument gets put into the capital model. So when you are evaluating new capital, yes, I'm going to do it. If you had the argument that, hey, my electric oven is going to save me 30% of my gas bill every year, maybe that's your reason for doing it. But it probably wouldn't be at the moment just a pure sustainability investment.
Well, I agree. I agree with Steve insofar. I too am very skeptical of carbon reduction units. However, at this time, we made a decision, and that is not exclusively that's one of the tools in the toolbox. So it's possibly about 25% of carbon offset total. But let me give you an example. We're in a program. We purchase our electricity from the city that we're in, who is one of the 4 cities that owns Platte River Power Authority. By 2030, they're going to be all on renewables. So I pay a premium for our electricity, 32% of our carbon footprint. And it is to attest that, yes, this is generated by wind and solar. And it's certified through a national program. I had the city in here last week telling me we're sunsetting that program at the end of March. So they gave me about a 5.5 week notice. So I said, okay, you're not going to be able to break out the percentage, they can tell me what's put in the grid, and they reminded me I'm not buying individual electrons that were generated by wind and rain. So what I've got to do, I've challenged them. I said, you have a 3.2 gigawatt solar field here in the city that you're feeding into the grid. You've got you're tied in as one of the owners of Platte River Power Authority to 2 wind farms, one in Colorado, one in northern Colorado, one in southern Wyoming. And I'm like, so let me ask the question. How do your customers like myself who are being challenged to go to renewable sources of electricity, how can I legitimately prove that? And they said, their response is, well, we'll get back to you. They have no alternative. They've made a decision. They're sunsetting a program, which is going to have an immediate impact on my carbon footprint, my scope 2 stuff.
Sorry,
Yeah.
can I just clarify? Are they not going to be able to give you the percentage split between renewable energy and
They will do that, but they will be able to do that. But the program, they call it Green Switch,
right?
And what they do is, so my electricity, I pay a surcharge per 100 kilowatt hour blocks, and to offset carbon generated electricity with renewable.
Okay,
So,
right.
and again, one of the tools in the toolbox. There's no one thing that is going to solve this problem. It's got to be a mix. It's got to be a mix of energy source. It's got to be a mix of technological approaches.
Exactly. I think at the end of the day, it's about taking the action within your operations and what you can control, and taking the action that you can. And then the way that we position it with our clients, at least, is saying, look, the goal here is not to, spend your way out of this problem. Like, it's about looking at your operations and trying to figure out how to make it more efficient. But at the same time, if you're looking to take additional climate action, then, look at it as not a tool to solve the problem, but something that you believe as a company that you want to help push forward. And from an offsets perspective, I've done a lot of research into the space myself, and the variability and quality of the offsets is massive, to the point where we almost didn't even want to help companies with that. But I decided that in the interest of leveraging the research I had done, it was more valuable to help educate people and buy good ones, because if they're going to buy them anyways, then I'd want to make sure that they're at least making a good decision in terms of the technology choices that they're making around those offset purchases. So it's a big challenge, and I think I'm hoping that'll, again, there's been legislation tabled in the UK that I hope will kind of spread around standards around this, and hopefully it'll get better over time. But I think at this point it's a little bit of a wild west.
I
think doing your research is definitely critical. So I want to coming on 143 here. So I want to just spend a little bit of time diving into 2 topics. One is, Steve, I'd love to hear just about a sustainability initiative that maybe you're particularly proud of, that you've implemented at one of your businesses.
And you just gave us a time warning, but I was going to grab 2. But so I think in my current role, one of the things that we did, it kind of kicked off some of our initiative here, was all around waste reduction. So the Delmar team, we realized that we blend a lot of sauces, so things like barbecue sauce, mayonnaise, and you pump it to the packing line, and there's 300 foot of pipe between the 2 pieces of equipment. When you get to the end of the run, that just got washed down the drain. So one, it was impacting our yield, but it was also impacting our effluent system, and it was just, from a carbon footprint, hey, all that food is just going to waste. We spent all that time growing it, we harvested it, we refined it and made it into a food ingredient, and then we throw it down the drain. So we invested in just an inline pigging system, just to get rid of everything outside of the pipes. And we'd set ourselves to go. I think it was 172 metric tons of CO2 equivalent, and we were able to do that within kind of a 3 or 4 month changeover. So numbers worked out really well. Everybody's really happy. We're putting more product into the finished goods. So that was a really nice one. And then I am going to grab the other one that I'm working with an upcycler, and I find that's really fascinating. Taking product that being rejected at retail level, what we call the ugly fruit and veg zone, and things that were just going to landfill and turning them back into food ingredients. There's nothing wrong with them. They were just ugly and they didn't fit the retailer spec. So working with that type of technology to get it back into the food industry. And I really like this one because I believe at some point we're going to be at a stage where we can provide an auditable claim on carbon reduction, but I think we'll be able to do it on a product. Hey, this is a 20% reduced carbon footprint burger bun. Whatever you want to do. It's just I think we can do it. So I think those are really fun areas to be playing with.
Really cool. How about you, Jim?
Very similar to what Steve described. When I came to the company 2.5 years ago, and we've been on a 50% year-on-year growth for the past 4 years, and we're expecting it for the next couple of years. So we're kind of riding a rocket. When I came here 2.5 years ago, 100% of all waste went to the landfill. And first thing we were able to do is get the bakery waste out of, after mapping the waste stream, getting the bakery waste. Well, right now that's a diversion for animal feed, and that's approximately 50% of our waste. So then, working with a recycler partner, we recycle all white paper, corrugate, plastic, drums, steel drums, and broken pallets. So that probably took another 30% or so out of the waste stream. So just to give you a comparison, when I started the company, $35 million a year is what we were doing 2.5 years ago. And we were spending $180,000 on waste. Well, right now, we just finished up 2023 at $96 million. And my total waste bill aggregate, because I sell my recyclable, I get rebates in that. I sell the animal feed. I only spend about $95,000 a year. And this year, I just bought a new compactor. We were contracted with we were renting. So I actually bought a new compactor, 33% larger than we had. Well, it wasn't new, it was used to refurbish. I bought it for a third of the cost of a brand new one. And because the rental, my return on investment just on the rent, avoiding the rental cost, is going to be a payoff in 5 months. So, and we've reduced. I used to send daily, so 4-5 compactors a week to the landfill. Right now, I've transitioned to a twice a week pickup, and that's, as I said, tripling volume, the business. So that's been a huge support. Operations, on the other hand, they're measuring waste now in line, important for their yield numbers and that, but they're verifying, so we're able to bounce numbers back and forth and data off each other. And so it's a really effective way to reduce carbon footprint, reduce landfill utilization, and number of trips that your waste people are making out here as far as pickup.
I can
I
actually
think
hear
you're
you.
on mute.
Oh, sorry about that. Last question. So, Steve, what are you most excited about in terms of the next couple of years? Like, there's any particular initiative, or what are you excited about in terms of the future of your sustainability work that you're doing?
I'd say I think that the big thing for us is just trying to get our numbers right so we can get it to a claimable and justifiable way forward. I think we're doing all the right things. I think there's a lot that food technology can bring in that sustainable market. And I think the great thing, like some of the things that Jim was just talking about there's a lot we can all do. We have a lot of technology at our fingertips to do. And what this sustainability initiative is doing is just bringing it to the top of the agenda, and it's not just because it's sustainable. Jim just said, look how much he's saving by not throwing waste away. So he's doing a great job. He's helping the environment and he's helping his bottom line. So I think there's a lot more of that to come.
Incredibly exciting. Okay, Jim, what's next for you? What are you excited about?
Well, again, I'm about robust and valid data collection. So whenever we make an effort within the sustainability issue, we have a 2-year strategic plan. We made a decision not to go out any further than that. At the end of each year, we're just going to tack another year on it. That way we can respond, be able to make legitimate, reasonable science and database claims. The biggest challenge that I see, that I hope to overcome is, and I'm finally getting some traction, I've got the ear of the CFO, being able to show cost benefit. I mean, that's something, it's easy, all that environmental, go hug a tree, go save a whale. It sounds good, it's feel good, but if you really, and it's the right thing to do, but when you're sitting down with the accountants, you really, really, really got to talk their language, their business. And again, if you look at ISSB, everything's supposed to conform to general accepted accountability practices, just like the accounting. And so having a robust, you're taken more seriously. And when you have that street credibility within the organization, you're able to even do more. So I've seen the term used, regenerative business. And I think that's where it's got to be successful. It keeps going. It snowballs. The more you do, the more you accomplish, the more you're able.
And on that note, I think that's the perfect way to end it. Thank you so much for your time, Jim. Thank you, Steve. It's been a really incredible conversation, and I really appreciate your time. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll chat soon.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.